go on to, it'll be English.
So if you look at the glasses, one has me, one has you. We want you during this presentation to think about what cultural glasses do you wear? And how does that influence who you are and how you interact with other people? So our presentation, if you would please, is entitled Getting to Know Your North Mason School District English Language Learners. Next one, please. Talking about culture. So we're going to go through the learning goals. We're going to give you some statistics from the North Mason County demographic data. You're going to learn about context of cultures. You're going to get a brief history about Guatemala. You're going to compare Guatemalan English language learners and other Latino students. And then we're going to come up with some ways to support our English language culture in the classroom. So our learning goals, we're going to develop some cultural competency for instruction. We're going to become familiar with our English language population, particularly our Guatemalan heritage students, because that's mostly where our EL students are from. We're going to identify similarities and differences between Guatemalan and other Latino students. And we're going to understand the most relevant events in recent Guatemalan history as they relate to our students. Okay. Next one, please. Did you know what percentage of North Mason students are of Hispanic background? What percentage of North Mason School District students are migrant? And what percentage have limited English proficiency? What countries share the borders with Guatemala? And how many languages are spoken in Guatemala? Where do most of our English language students come from? And the video you're seeing right now is a little tour through a town where most of our families in Guatemala come from. It's called Huehuetenango. Okay, next one, please.
So on this slide, what we have is our data, and this is directly taken from OSPI, and that is from what we were able to access, at that time in August. And so October 2016, if you notice, the percentage of the Hispanic Latinos was 20%. But if you look at special programs, which is constitutional bilingual, we had 10% of the students who were in DLR students. Now, I have worked for North Mason School District since, as I told you, the year 2000. So I went back and looked at data, trying to remember what it was like when I started. And when I looked at that, I realized that the percentage of transitional bilingual students was less than 1%. It was 0.9%. And we had about 3% of the students who were of Hispanic or Latino, ancestry. So that gives you an idea of how the population has changed in our district. We also gathered data that was directly taken from our own, tracking of our students in our different elementaries. So as you can see, Delta Elementary, when we looked at our students from Guatemalan ancestry, we had last year around 96% of our students. And Centel had a similar percentage. And then we also, gathered data from our other ELR teachers across our district. And those are the languages that are spoken in our district, other than English. Families might speak English and, a second language, and the second language might be their first language, and so you can see how Tanjoal, which is the language spoken by most families of native Guatemalan ancestry, is what is mostly predominant in our district, and then we have Spanish and some other languages you can see. Next slide, please. When you look at Mason County, and I hope we can enlarge that data. I can't. You don't mind? Do you have that? Well, if you look at the Hispanic population in the year area, thank you, in the year 2000, let's go back to that year, the percentage of students in Mason County was 5% of Hispanic students. And now look at how the population has increased now in 2014. So really, our population of this students of Hispanic ancestry is growing, as is pretty evident from that census data. And also, I gathered some other data that I would like to share with you. So this is US data. 45% of students who are English language learners are from Guatemala, and then we have 68% English limited proficient students are of Mexican ancestry. And our state has 208 languages spoken, across the state of Washington. And 10% of them are ERL, of all 10%, 67% are Spanish speaking.
Question on the data here. I'm confused as to how to do that. So if I'm looking at that top number of 2,361 people of Hispanic background in the county.
In Mason County, yes.
What's the 794?
That is in 2014. So you have,
That's the.
794 would be the,
Or national.
yeah, right, yes.
Right. What is great?
I will get back to you because that information, I was mostly focusing on the number of Hispanic students that we have seen in general in Mason County, or families first. So. We were really looking into it.
That's why I can see that 2,361 has jumped to 50, more than double.
And then the percentage, from 2%, 5% to 9%. That's what we were really more.
So my only confusion is strictly with that. Rank.
Yeah.
What's that usually?
Let's continue. This concept is a very useful concept to understand how cultures function within their environment. So the context is called, the concept is called context of cultures, and that there are cultures that function within what is called higher context, meaning that they are more in relation to their environment. They respond more to their environment. They receive and give more from their environment. So this is a concept developed by Paul, and it's a concept that has a neutral connotation, meaning it's not positive or negative, whether you are belong to a culture that is have higher context need than a lower context need. So, for example, you can see there is a curve there, and this concept relates to 5 indicators. One is association, meaning how people relate to others. Interaction, if you need more verbal or more verbal interaction to understand what you're trying to communicate. Territoriality, meaning a sense of space. Like how do you feel about the area in which you connect to others? We were giving an example in our presentation where we watched a person from a northern, Denmark or one of those countries, and he was telling this other person that when he was interacting with a person from South America, where I'm from, there was a dance happening at that moment because we had
South American or?
either way.
Okay.
I'm South American. So,
Okay.
So the person from South America would try to get closer, right? And the person from Denmark kept his space, which is not because of what the person, it really relates to how they relate within their own culture. And so when you're in an environment that is new to you, these situations occur. So that's territoriality. And we talked about temporality. For example, how important, what is the meaning of time? How flexible is time? We have an understanding of temporality as do things change all the time, or do things change slowly? So those are the concepts that some cultures are more related to, whether one way or another. Learning relates to, in some cultures, learning occurs in a very independent way. While in other ones, it's more of a group event. So based on those concepts, where do you think our families from Guatemala are mostly located within that continuum? If you see the Japanese culture, and this is not, we don't want to stereotype. That's the first thing that I should have said probably, but they are general concepts, or large groups of concepts. It's not the individual person. You cannot classify one person because the person is from a certain country. This is how you are. But there are many other factors that influence who we are. So, but within that continuum, we think our Guatemalan students, or of Guatemalan ancestry, they kind of fall within Mexican, Spanish, because there are senses, you sense that your space is more communal, you relate to people, you use a lot of non-verbal, even the language itself has a different inflection. So there are other factors, that make who we are us, but are also
Pretty interesting, but I don't fully get, I would want to study those 5 things. I mean, I get 2 of them really well. The other 3, the first 2 and the last one, are a little harder for me to understand without studying them more. So this, to me, is just a teaser.
it's good, because then it will make you, become more curious about learning, how.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to rate a culture or one of these there based on just knowing this, because I don't know it yet.
And that is the caveat there, is that we cannot say because you come from Mexico, because you come from Guatemala, or you come from Japan, this is how you're going to be. Because that is the most important thing, is that we are unique individuals that who are impacted by many different factors, not just where we come from.
Right,
you know.
individuals are always unique regardless of their
Yeah.
culture. But at the same time, there are cultural things that sometimes, well, oftentimes, that they're part of you anyway. You're very individual. Nevertheless, I wouldn't know how to do that without understanding those 5 things a whole lot better, for an individual or for culture. So, I would not have guessed from what does high mean and what does low mean, I don't know that.
So, so just to give you an idea, high context means that how much input do you need from your environment? So for example, say if you, can you zoom out please? People's relations. In a high context culture, say for example, your family is not just mom, dad, and children. Your family is your extended family. Your extended family is treated with the same regards as your mom and your dad and your godmother and your godfather and your cousin and nephew. So that's a high context culture. In a low context culture, you establish your unity. You know, your family unity is really more close, right? So it really relates to how much the environment impacts and the people around you impacts who you are.
And one of the things that I remember too that you were saying is on the low context, individuality is something that's really valued on the low context. The high context, you are dependent really on your families, whether it's decision-making, for survival. So those were 2 differences that I remember when I first heard that stood out for me.
Yes.
And what does it mean with all 5? Each one, these are all amalgams of the 5. And what is something weighted more than another? I mean, I'm looking at, for example, what little I know, or maybe more, Scandinavian and German. I would have put them different. On the other hand, I could see another way why it would work that way. So it depends on the particular context, but there's an amalgam.
Exactly.
Where does that come from? How does that work?
You're exactly right, because we can be probably higher in one context and lower in a different one, because we are not just one block, you know, and our culture is the only thing that defines us. So that's absolutely right, yes.
But it's helpful in teaching to know if your students are used to learning in a group, whether they're used to choral reading, whether they get in each other's space because they're from 2 different cultures, like the interaction that these ladies just demonstrated. Those are important things to know.
And so all that goes together in some fashion, and just looking at it directly, it's, okay, I just have to take it on faith. But otherwise, if I'm working with it, I need to know more, and I want to explore more. Working with an individual person, well, I want to know their culture, I want to know more about their culture and that person. And that's what I would need to do.
So one of the activities we had our teachers do was we asked them to imagine that an alien from planet Riafled takes you to its leader and asks you, who are you? What would your response be? They broke down what the responses were, but for me, how does my identity influence me as a teacher? I will tell you, I am a mother, I am a wife, I am a daughter of Puerto Rican heritage, I am a lover of dogs. I bring that to my classroom and relate to students in that way. So I'm going to ask you, how does your identity influence you as a teacher? I'll give you a minute to think, pair, and share.
Are you wanting us to respond?
Yes, we do. We'd love for you to
Of course,
respond.
we're not the teachers, we're just
So,
board members.
influence you as a person.
Well, I'm a mother. I'm a mother, and it's hard to explain that. That would be really hard to explain to somebody that just came here from outer space, right? Like that, I have like 5 things to say to you, and what's my 5 top things? But and if we're, who am I? I'm mother and lover of God, and I love to help my community, and I don't know if there's a lot.
And
There's a lot.
And that really then influences how you respond to your community, how you work in your community, all those things.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's really interesting, the previous slide with the continuum.
Yes.
Because certainly my cultural background is kind of German Swiss. And the hardest thing for me in my first few years of teaching was getting comfortable with little kids being up close and in my space. And that was really difficult. And it helps for people like us who are working with kids to understand why we're reacting the way we are to things that should seem just fine in the classroom environment.
Anybody else?
I would like to say, I remember growing up as a kid very well, and I was very alienated or different in my own sense of whatever it was. I felt like there was an old John Donne, how do you say his last name, poet, writer from a long time ago, "No man is an island." When I was a kid, I'm an island.
No go.
And, I actually wrote, when I was in college, my first year of college, I wrote a little essay about how I, got to throw that out, that no man is an island, doesn't work. And of course, that's totally come around. And now, yep, no man is an island. When you think you are, you're not. I know that much better, and that's just the growth that I've had as a human being. From a cultural background, I have a fractured one. I didn't grow up in any culture. That was very obvious, even though my parents came from two different backgrounds. They were traditional American historical stuff like that. German Lutheran, English Catholic, and Protestant, all that sort of stuff. That both my parents put none of that onto me. Of course, there's the osmosis of how they relate to each other, which was fractured and stuff like that. And of course, I grew up in neighborhoods where there wasn't anyone else like me. In any case, I got past all that and started to understand kids. Because when I grew up, I didn't have a lot of help on that. Although I didn't necessarily need a lot of help, I just needed a lot of support. I relate to the kids really well now. I see the stuff going on, and then they don't see themselves. Of course, I'm interpreting it for myself. I see needs that they have, and just very much relate to where they're coming from. I had an example just not too long ago where I work, one of our kids here, two of the kids, there were more than two of them, of course, but were going swimming. And one of the kids that went swimming had no English. I presume he was Guatemalan, but he could have not been Guatemalan. In any case, he probably understood some of the stuff that he spoke as English, but he certainly couldn't speak any of it. And the other kid also was probably Guatemalan. I could even name his name, but it's not important. I'm going to watch that kid because I really want him. He's going to be great. He spoke very, very good English, and he spoke very fluent, whatever the language he was speaking, which I have no idea what it was. Probably that one that you pronounced that I can't pronounce. And he was very fluent, and he interpreted, and he spoke to the other kid to help them out. And I said, well, there's a kid, this one who spoke in two languages. There's a kid. I just wish I could have been like that when I was a kid too. Helping other ones out, but here he's helping out, and I caught on to that very quickly. That's the sort of thing. That's where I come from now. There you go.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Okay, move on to the next slide.
Where do most of our ELs come from? They keep changing the language in our field, our area. Teaching, it was ELLs, now it's ELs, and just to keep us on our toes, I guess. English learners. They are, most of our students are from San Pedro Saloma, Huehuetenango, and this area is, the city that you saw before is like Shelton would be to Mason County. The states in Guatemala are called departments, and this particular quote up above was an excerpt from a letter that a Catholic priest from San Pedro sent to Mateo Santiago, our translator for the district. The reason he wrote this letter to Mateo is Mateo was able to go home to visit for the first time 3 years ago. And when he did, instead of just having a wonderful time with his family, he realized, he said, I have forgotten the violence and the poverty, and I want to do something about it. So, not this last summer, but the previous summer, he brought computers for the first time to schools in some of the villages there, operating directly off the satellite to get the internet. And this summer, he did some projects we'll look at later, but he asked the priest to explain to the people here so that he could gather support to do the projects that he's been involved in. So the priest said, here live 98% of the population of the COMPETENCY Mayan culture that is evident in the way they dress, in their language, and in their traditions. Much of the population is peasant and illiterate people. No road, no electricity, no drinking water, no health service, or a good education for children. To reach these communities, it is necessary to walk on foot or on horseback for approximately 3 hours, and most of it's uphill through jungle. Every morning, the girls, before going to school, must go to collect water in long-distance wells to provide this valuable liquid to the whole family. There are communities that the girls walk about an hour to collect the vital liquid in jars. Next slide, please. So we talked about how can knowledge of our EL's cultural values affect teacher expectations and instruction. So family is a huge value, and like we were talking before, it's extended family. And group decisions are a big thing. I found that out when I was previously covering both middle and high school ELs before the population burgeoned so much. And if there were field trips and we had to get permission slips signed, they would be saying, we gotta get the permission slips, where are they? And I would say to the kids, hey, where are they? And they'd be like, well, Grandpa wasn't there last night, so we need to have Grandpa there, and Uncle so-and-so, he'll be back on Monday. It had to be a group decision. It wasn't like other kids, they go home, hand it to mom signs, and then dad says, wait a minute, weren't we going somewhere later, you know? So really different in that way. So the role of religion is in the daily life. All of the families I know attend either the Prince of Peace Catholic Church here or the Alma Church, which is related to the Assembly of God's Church. A lot of the people, it's the only social life they have in the villages is with their church. There also is shamanism to a certain extent. We've had incidences where when we had to meet over some issues with a student, they said, well, my mom asked my grandpa in Guatemala to go to the wise man, and the wise man looked at some things that a bird did and determined that was our destiny. And so we have to be respectful and honor his beliefs, even though they may seem very different than ours, but it is part of some of the culture, not everybody, but sometimes these are the things you hear. Also with medicine, sometimes somebody knows an herbal treatment that may very well work. A lot of our medicines come from those things, but sometimes I find myself saying, well, you need to tell the doctor that this is what you're taking also, and if you know the ingredients, that's good too. So respect. When I meet with parents, and I believe at the other schools too, the parents don't seem quite as concerned about grades as respect. They want to know, is my son, is my daughter being respectful of all the teachers? I don't want any trouble from them. Teachers are held on a pedestal. I've been trying not to topple up of mine because they are afraid sometimes to contradict teachers, and you ask their opinion and they say, thank you, and like, no, your opinion, please. So it's difficult at times. We do have, I'm really happy to see some of the parents who have been here longer are starting to be a little more proactive, and it's really nice to see them taking those roles, especially some of the moms. Older siblings care for and teach younger siblings, and I think that's kind of what you were seeing in terms of, I see that in my classroom too. Everybody's pretty much willing to help the others, and you know, the big thing is saying for the homework and studying for the test is fine, but not during the test, no helping. So the contradictions in cultures are difficult because girls sometimes marry between 10 and 14 years old, often to a man who's around 20. who in their culture is more stable. And there's a courtship, traditional courtship kind of thing that goes on. And it's very different than the laws here, of course. So Mateo often comes in at least once or twice a trimester. We talk particularly to the high school students about you need to understand the laws here and consequences so that you can make good choices. And down at the bottom is another quote from the priest. Women are doubly marginalized. They are not given an education, and some of them are not registered in the National Registry of People because they are women. Nor do they receive a good education as carriers of life for the whole community and country. So the girls often are very, very quiet and timid in the classes that I've had, the newcomer girls in particular. And they tend to be very, very responsible kinds of students. But it's, really difficult to, and when they finally do bloom, it's exciting. So it's difficult at first, but they do bloom eventually. So on education, in Guatemala, grades 1 through 6 are free public education, but you go to school when you can. There's a lot of survival mode. I talked to a man who had visited in the area where Mateo was, and he said he saw people put into a pan like one piece of chicken, a carrot, maybe a couple potatoes, and make a soup out of it, and that was to last the family for 2-3 days. So there's a lot of scrounging for food, so a lot of people are not in school because they are taking whatever work they can get or scrounging for food. Disabled students do not go to school. Years ago, it was Thea who discovered a girl living in a home who had crossed eyes, and she had never been to school. She was 13, and had to let me talk to her to see what was going on. And she had never been to school because she was considered disabled and unable to go to school in that culture's perspective. So we were able to help her connect with Lions Club to get surgery and to help with the eyes. Art and oral traditions are emphasized. There's some really interesting colored sand sculptures that people do either on the ground or in frames that sit up. Also, you saw the clothing at the beginning of the slideshow with the intricate weaving that goes on all by hand. Students learn rudimentary arithmetic, no science or history unless the parents can afford to pay for more education past grade 6. And even some of the students I've had who actually have completed like grade 10 in Guatemala really don't, they have a little beginning algebra, but they look at the math here going, I don't know that yet. So these are some quotes I've had. I very as an entry task, I usually have the students write, and then I go around and encourage them and correct their writing. And when I went around, I suddenly realized, the question I had asked was, what is the biggest difference you notice between your home country and here? And I didn't say positive, negative, otherwise. Over half of the students said something about safety. So I said, okay, tell me about that. Are the streets safe? No, the streets aren't safe. And I said, what about homes? They said, well, some homes. I said, well, unfortunately here too, there are some homes that aren't safe. I said, what about the schools? No, nobody helps you. I said, what do you mean they don't help you? Don't help you with your schoolwork? No. What if somebody's bothering you? No. And then a couple of the students that I had known a little longer, they shared with me that at even 8 years old, they were threatened with knives in school and nobody did anything about it. I said, why the threats? What was the problem? They said, because we're from the hills and we're browner. And so there's a lot of prejudice against the indigenous people, which most of our students are from that group. In our schools, we have Kanhoval and Quiche are the two languages and cultural groups that we have. The Quiche are from probably a place more like Tenango, the place you saw in the video. They have, in the towns, there is more evidence of the violence in terms of various gangs, people with armed weapons, that are armed with weapons in storefronts. A lot of shopkeepers hire people to protect them, and they're all different groups, so you don't know who you're dealing with, I guess, at any one time. The people in the hills are isolated, and like the priest was noting, those kinds of impoverished conditions. They come out of the hills, they're going to get hit with the violence as well. So there are also some of the arts and skills. This picture is of the Zaculio Mayan ruins. Some students may be familiar with that, but they really don't understand, at least the students we have, many of them really don't understand their history back to the days of the Mayan Empire. The sculptures made with colored sand, detailed drawings. Most of the students are excellent artists. They do a lot of drawing in their classes. Weaving and design, and some practical knowledge of tending animal and plants. So they tend to thrive in the classes of horticulture, and a lot of them have had horses because that was the only way to move things from one area to another. And let's see. Our students also come to us with trauma. These are the 10 countries with the highest child homicide rates. They are all in Latin America. Okay, and these were, I'm trying to remember what year this was. This was, I think, 2016 or 2015, one of those. Yes, 2015. And Guatemala was for a long time vying for the top 3, kind of rotating with Honduras and El Salvador. It kind of mixes around, so it's one of the highest rates of murder of children in the world and of people in the world. If you go to the U.S. State Department's website and look at travel in Guatemala, there are all kinds of warnings. Okay, Mateo, our translator, he's dancing on the right, handing a little backpack to somebody. He's making a difference in the Carnaval villages. In the summer of 2017, he brought the first computers to some schools along with pencils and backpacks. Pencils are, like, if you have one pencil for school for a year, you are so lucky. If you have a backpack, wow, that's amazing. The students have told me if they have a plastic grocery bag from the trash that they found in the dumps, that's what they usually carry their stuff in. Summer 2018, Mateo was rebuilding schools, installing compostable toilets, building safe play areas, and providing more basic school supplies. The compostable toilets, they had basically outhouses, pit toilets, and were running out of areas to put them. Mm-hmm. And we met with some people from the Rotary and other, and there was a big suggestion about putting in compostable toilets because the gardening that they were doing was all in like soda bottles. The land there, all of the good land, was bought up by the United Fruit Company. And I'll get into the history here in a moment, but the idea with compostable toilets, buying the ones that were a little more expensive, actually made it usable as fertilizer in gardens so that, and it would be safe still to eat the vegetables from those gardens. So Mateo just showed me the other day, and I didn't get a chance to put it into this program. He had pictures of, instead of here are all these soda bottles looking vaguely hopeful that something might grow, to having actual gardens, and it was really, really nice. So, just in terms of the history, in 1954, there was a president in Guatemala who, and it was during the time of the Cold War, and there were concerns that that particular president would turn communist, kind of like Fidel Castro, and there were lots of concerns. The United States sent the CIA and some military advisors into Honduras next door, got some troops together, and came in and overthrew that particular leader. Unfortunately, it turned into a 30-year civil war. Eventually, there was a lot of turnover of politics and stuff, and civil war erupted in 1966 to 1996. The war officially was over in 96, but by then, 30 years of war was a generation of people getting used to a level of violence far beyond what we're used to. And even though it was officially over, there are still a lot of factions, a lot of drug running gangs, all kinds of things happening there still. And that's the big thing that comes up with the safety, is that students here feel like Belfair is like the safest place in the world. And just a little bit on that note, there was an officer that I asked one time, because I noticed that in Shelton and Bremerton there's a little more gang activity, at least evidence of it. And I asked him, he said, I believe it's because the Guatemalans are in this area. I said, what do you mean? He said, how many families do you know that you think might be gang involved in Belfair? Guatemalan families. I said, only one. And he said, yeah. And he said, the gangs that are to the north and south of us figure we don't have to worry about what's behind us. And so they just kind of leave Belfair alone, which is fine with me and probably with you too. But they are peaceful people wanting just to have a good life for their families and keep them safe.
So we're going to move on to now talking about Hispanic students. As we know, the majority of our students are of Guatemalan ancestry. So what's the main difference or similarities and differences, between Guatemalan and other Latino students? As we have explained before, when we look at, say, Guatemalan, Mexican, Peruvian, and from other nationalities that are Latin American to some degree, we have an area in which we all connect, and that is Spanish. First of all, is the official language. But I say official in quotations because we'll talk about it in a minute. Now, there's also a secondary, because we tend to be a high context culture where, familiarity, you relate to your relatives to a higher level of bonding. You also have something that makes you a little bit different. That is your socioeconomic status. That's one big difference in different cultures. But it's also how rural or urban countries are. Guatemala is a pretty rural country. And because of its rurality, we have more isolated communities. So you have more people speaking languages and dialects of those languages. Guatemala has many languages besides Spanish. Spanish is official, but they have Quiche, Campobal, and other ones that I don't speak any of them. But and they do have people speaking Spanish. But it's mostly taught in schools. And as we have already heard from Bruce, we have families that with children who do not complete their education, from K-12, what would be here. So that's a big difference. So we have more urban students in other countries, and Guatemalan students tend to be more rural. So there's lower or limited formal education too. So we have more, we've noticed in our experience working for the district that the families that we get tend to have, males tend to get a formal education more than females. Females tend to be, in charge of the household and the cleaning and the cooking. So there are very defined roles too. I was saying that Spanish is official because it really is on paper. It's if we ask our students, the language that is mostly spoken by them within their household would depend upon mom and dad's first language. Because sometimes a parent may speak Campobal, a mom or dad, and then the other parent might speak a different dialect. So they develop a sort of a pidgin or a language, lingua franca, which would be a language which they can all communicate. So when the kids come to our schools, they are exposed to English, of course, but to be able to communicate with their families, they communicate in Spanish, because that's the language that can be, that they can all agree upon. So that's what we have observed in our schools. Also, we have kids who come from other nationalities that are, other countries in America. We don't get many here, but in other districts, the students come from more urban backgrounds. Even students from Guatemala who come from areas that are closer to Mexico, we notice a difference. They have more exposure to television and to, means of transportation, so they are more familiar with what they will encounter here in the United States. Any questions? Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, all of this information will serve us. We are presenting it because we wanted to serve a purpose. And the purpose, as we explained when we had our learning goals, were how can we use what we know now to make a difference in our classrooms. So that was the main reason why we wanted to present this. And that is, first of all, we cannot assume. We can never assume that because a student comes from Guatemala, the student will have this background. Because as we said before, well, the student might come from an urban area. The student might have a different socioeconomic status. The student might have a different first language. We don't really know who we have until we get to know our student. So because of that, we need to really gain knowledge of who we have as a student. Now, because of cultural differences, I have a personal example that occurred to me many, many years ago when I first started working for the district. And briefly, I will tell you. I was working as a paraprofessional in, say, the year 2000, and I was greeted, welcome by all the staff, and I was really happy working there. But one day I noticed something that I didn't notice before, and that was I would walk by and I would see staff talking among each other, and I would say hi, and I would walk by and I would get no response. And then I would think, well, this is weird. The person was friendly before. And then it happened over and over and over and over. And so I got to the point that I'm thinking, well, there has to be something else. And then I realized something that I didn't know before. And that was, coming from Peru, I know that you can talk to anyone. You can have these multiple conversations going on. And it's perfectly fine. It's not considered impolite. You can be talking to someone, but take the time to say hi, and then bye, and continue on. But that was considered rude here. But I was already an adult, so nobody was going to tell me, please don't interrupt, because I am an adult. So why I say this is because you learn a culture. When you're immersed in the culture, you absorb it. It's not taught explicitly. But when you are in a different culture, you must know these, ways to behave that are different. You must learn them. You must acknowledge that you have your own ways, right? Because you came from somewhere, but you are learning something else too. So because of that, we have this other suggestion. We have to be explicit. We need to make sure that when we're teaching something, we are using moments that happen all the time to explicitly tell, well, in this culture, this happens this way, and this other culture here in the United States, things happen this other way. No way is bad or wrong or right or wrong, but we have to make sure that it's clear. Finally, we have to connect students' experiences into our teaching. Because for a student who doesn't know us, who might have never heard his or her name mentioned when you're teaching writing, and you're going to put that kid's name on the pedestal and mention, the student's experience, it's going to make a difference when we can connect those little little examples, those analogies that we can make, that we can bring our students' experiences into the classroom. So, but to do that, we need to get to know them first. And that was, I don't think we have one more slide. So if you would like to learn more about cultures, we have, there's also a survey there. I think, was it a survey, or the one that we had for high and low context culture?
There is a survey. You can
Yes.
find out where you are, you can follow that spectrum.
Yeah, if you
Very
follow that
nice.
link, then you can find a little bit more, you can learn more about Guatemala, and there's also the dictionary, a basic Campobal dictionary.
Cool.
That is, and I believe, if I remember correctly, it will have the pronunciation.
Oh, good.
Yes, yes, it works.
Very
Thank you
nice.
very much. I think
Thank
that's
you
it.
for the opportunity, yes.
Yes, thank you.
I have a couple of questions. I just wanted to say this to the end. So, two of them, basically, we do have a large community here. What brought them here? Why Belfair?
What brought the?
Yeah, what brought them to Belfair?
The thing that I've learned from talking to the families who've been here longest is that many of the migrant workers who go from Southern California up to Oregon, following the crops of the seasons up
Okay.
into Washington, when they finally realized, and they got here, a lot of them coming here to escape the Civil War, came here like during the 1980s. Those were the first families who came. And they came here and they suddenly realized they didn't have to keep moving. The brush picking here allowed them to have a home and not to have to keep moving. And so at that time, the brush picking was a pretty good deal. And the families made a living out of it. They'd be out sun up to sundown. Sometimes I would take my dogs for a walk up in the hills and I'd run into ladies with the sandals on and bare feet and it's kind of spitting snow. Just really hardworking. And made a living from it. When the economy took a dive in 2008, the price of a hand of brush went down, and it really hurt a lot of families who were managing up to that time. But the big thing was to be able to have a home.
And then the other one, I know both my kids have been in the classrooms with a bunch of the EL students. Is there, and I'm not going to try to attempt to say what the name of those languages are. I have a tough time enough with the English language. Is there a big difference in the dialects or even those languages, even between what you say, the urban versus the hill communities?
There are some languages that are based on the Mayan language, so they are dialects of variations of Mayan languages, or the Mayan language. And while there are some other ones that are not related to that, I don't have in front of me, the different languages, but that data is available, and you can find that. But there are Canjobal does not really have connections to Spanish other than using borrowed words, or loan words. That means the language developed to its degree, and then the Spaniards came and they introduced new words like, say, table or chair, or other words. And so you acquire those other words. You just use those other words to express that new vocabulary. So yes, there are going to be some words in Canjobal that are very similar to Spanish, but it's because of the influence of the Spanish language over.
The different dialects they usually can't understand each other very well, even though they're all from the Mayan. It's kind of like the Latin languages, French and Italian. You can hear some similarities. There's a root language with the Latin, but with the Mayan language, it's really spread out quite a ways, and some of the people were geographically separated for a long time, so the languages.
But it's pretty much the same dialect from that community they come from?
Yeah, the Canjobal group, it's a cultural group as well as a language. The Quiche group also have a language.
It's super fascinating. It really is. Anybody else have any questions?
This was really great, and it made me understand a few things that I didn't know. My father raised our family on brush picking. He's Irish, but that was his job, and it took a huge dive even before that 2008 time. So he had to go out and get a different job. But I feel like
like this presentation should be on the news. Like people that don't understand those charts that you had of of where it's dangerous and all that. That's huge, because I listened to a Christian radio station, and they were it's a talk radio, and they were talking about the ones that are coming here now and the fight that they have to go through, and that was huge. And I'm a wiener, so I cry, but that was really good.
It's really hard because a lot of the parents, a lot of them are illiterate or barely literate, and their government does nothing to help. So people say, well, why don't they apply? And there's no way to apply to get a visa to go somewhere.
I think about it, some of the people that have had surgeries, they say they can't get it here, but they go to Mexico. And I'm like, why? These people on that side are like, we want to go here for education and healthcare and all these things. And I'm like, why wouldn't they want the same things? You know? And I don't claim to political side, so I don't get into that, but I don't know, that's a hard one. It's a hard one to have to deal with. But thank you, guys.
Anything else? All right, I would entertain a motion to close this study session. You don't need one. Oh, okay, we're just gonna close the study session then.
I'd like a fiver before we start the next meeting. Yeah.
Make it so.
Okay.
Thank you guys,
Thank
that was
you.
That was
amazing.
awesome. Thank you.
And you'll share that PowerPoint so I can share it with the
Yes,
board?
I'll
Thank you.
Yeah.